Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In today's video, we'll be covering lab number 4 in the clickjacking module titled Exploiting Clickjacking Vulnerability to Trigger DOM-Based XSS. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the exercise, I'm going to click on Academy, select all labs, do a search on clickjacking, and then select lab number 4 titled Exploiting Clickjacking Vulnerability to Trigger DOM-Based XSS. Alright, let's get started. This lab contains an XSS vulnerability that is triggered by a click. Construct a clickjacking attack that fools the user into clicking the click me button to call the print function. So the target goal over here is to perform a clickjacking attack that exploits an XSS vulnerability to call the print function. So we're really chaining two vulnerabilities together. Let's access the lab. Now notice over here, this is the built-in browser in Burp, and so all my requests are already being passed in my Burp proxy. Okay, let's click on Submit Feedback over here. What we're looking for is first an XSS vulnerability. So let's submit this with regular values. So let's say test, the email is test@test.ca, the subject is test1, and then the message is test2. And then click on Submit Feedback. Now notice over here, you get a response saying, thank you for submitting feedback, and then you've got the name of the user. So we've got reflected input over here that takes in the name from a user controllable variable, which is this variable right over here, and then outputs it in the response. And so this definitely should be tested for an XSS vulnerability. And we'll go right ahead and test it for DOM-based XSS because the lab specifies that we need to trigger a DOM-based XSS vulnerability. So we'll say image src is equal to 1. It can be anything. And then we'll say on error, call the print function. Now, we're not actually performing any useful action over here that has an impact. We're just calling the print function because that's how we're going to be able to complete the lab. So let's say the email address is test@test.ca, and then the subject is test and the message is test. Now, when we click on Submit Feedback, if this name parameter is vulnerable to DOM-based XSS, we should be displayed with the feature to print the web page. So let's click Submit Feedback. And here we go. It automatically triggers us to print our application. So let's click Cancel. We've confirmed that this parameter is vulnerable to a DOM-based XSS. Now the next step is to perform a clickjacking attack. But before we do that, we need a way to pre-populate these fields for the user so that when the user clicks on the Submit Feedback button without knowing that they're clicking on the Submit Feedback button, what they're doing is actually triggering the print function. So to do that, let's see if it accepts the parameter in the URL. So let's say name is equal to test and hit enter. And here we go. So if you add the parameter over here in the URL, it actually pre-populates it for you. So let's say test and then email address was test@test.ca, and then the subject was equal to test. This could be really anything, and then the message, I'll also put it equal to test and hit enter. And it pre-populated all the fields for us. So this is amazing news. That means we could use it in a clickjacking attack. Now the next step over here is to populate our name field with our DOM-based XSS vulnerability, which was image src is equal to 1. And then on error, I want you to call the print function. Hit enter, and here we go. All right, so now it's pre-populated with the correct fields that will exploit the DOM-based XSS vulnerability. The next step is to frame this web application and then put a decoy website on top of it so that the user has no idea that they're actually submitting a malicious feedback form. So to do that, we're going to go to the exploit server and build our script there. As usual, the first thing we're going to do is frame the main application or the legitimate application. So we'll say iframe src is equal to the link to the legitimate application. And then we'll close the iframe element. So the link over here is this one. Let's copy it, paste it in here. Now notice over here, we are keeping the link with the pre-populated fields because we need this field to be pre-populated with a DOM-based XSS vulnerability. Otherwise, this clickjacking attack is useless. And so let's view exploit right over here. Perfect, so we're able to frame it. If you go down right over here, you could see the fields are pre-populated. Now, we don't want this to be presented to the user this way because this clearly looks like there's something fishy over here. And so we need to style our iframe element to make it look legitimate. So we'll use the style attribute over here, or the style element. And then we'll say for the iframe element, I want you to apply all these rules. And the rules are similar to previous labs. So the position is relative. The width is 1,000. This could be anything. The height is 1,000. Again, this could be anything as well. I just like to pick 1,000. And then opacity, ideally this should be invisible, but before we make it invisible, we need to make sure that our legitimate website and our decoy website are on top of each other in the correct way. And so I'm going to put the opacity at 0.5, and then I'll make it invisible once I have them overlapping each other. And then the Z index, which is the stacking index, it's set to 2 because the legitimate website has to be at the bottom and the decoy website has to be at the top. So let's view exploit over here. This looks much, much better. Now let's go back. And we forgot a semicolon over here. Now the next step is to have our decoy website. This is a really simple attack. And so my decoy website is just going to be a div element that says click me. And I need to style that div element so that it looks a little bit legitimate. So we'll say div, and we'll say the position is absolute. The top, let's set that to 700. We'll likely need to change that. And then the left, let's say 50 pixels. And then the Z index has to be equal to 1 because, like I said, the decoy website has to be on top of the legitimate website. And so we set it to 1 over here. And for the legitimate website, we set it to 2. So let's view our exploit. So far, so good. So this is my legitimate website. And then this is my decoy website, which just has the click me string. Now I want the click me string to be exactly on top of the submit feedback button so that when the user clicks on the click me string, what they're really clicking on is the submit feedback button. So let's go back over here and change that to, let's say, 810. View exploit. And perfect, so it's right on top of submit feedback. Now, if we send this to the user, they'll know that there's something fishy because they could see that they're actually clicking on the application itself and they're triggering a cross-site scripting or an XSS vulnerability. And so we need to change the opacity to be completely invisible to the user. So we'll do that over here. Instead of 0.5, we'll say 0.001. And then let's view the exploit again. And here we go. Now all the user sees is the click me button over here. However, if you right click and inspect, you could see the click me button. What it's really doing is submitting the feedback, and it's submitting the feedback with the DOM-based XSS vulnerability. So this looks good. Now let's deliver the exploit to our victim user and hope that the user clicks the button and then gets triggered with the print function. But before we do that, let's put it in the document clickjackinglab04.html and save it, and I'll add the link to this exploit in the description. So deliver exploit to victim, and we wait a little bit for the victim user to click on it, and then hopefully we should get the congratulations, you solved the lab message. If we don't, that means something is wrong. Let's reload it. and see if we get the message. And if we go back over here and reload it, we do not get the message, which means the user did not successfully click on it. So something's wrong with our script. Let's make this at 0.05 and test it again. So view exploit. This looks okay to me. And I know what's wrong over here. I'm missing a portion of my DOM-based XSS vulnerability. So let's go back. And this over here on error print, what you need is a closing tag. So if we go back over here, we need to close off our image tag, hit enter. So it should be displayed this way. So let's copy this, put it in here, change the opacity back to 0.0001. And before we deliver the exploit to the victim user, let's copy it over here and paste it in our exploit, save it, and I'll add the link to that in the description, and then deliver exploit to victim user. And here we go. We get the congratulations, you solved the lab message. All right, so we successfully completed the exercise. In the next lab, we'll look at another case of a clickjacking vulnerability.